Feminism can mean many things to many people. The mainstream conservative narrative still appears to consider it a single thing, and that thing is aggressive, anti-male, revolutionary, and organized by millions of secretly angry and hate-filled women. So obviously whatever I say is not going to change that. In this episode, however, I welcome Lulu to talk about some of the issues that face women on a daily basis. We talk about the concept of feminism from her perspective. We look at feminism through art, not necessarily as the subject of that art, but how feminism can be indirectly manifested as a result of exposure to female narratives. Thank you, Lulu, for your time and your thoughts. Two in the mic, clocking out. Enjoy.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro etu under mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye etu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji etu under mic. Wola wachokre wabed piny bi wawinje ero chako moment ndi and a mic podcast makende.
I'm joined today again, I'm happy to say, by Lulu. How have you been, Lulu?
I've been good, studying again, working a bit. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah. Yes, well, same. Well, except I say same, except for the studying. I wish I was studying. Unfortunately, studying days are somewhat either behind me or far in the future. But staying busy is definitely something that that keeps me going. We are obviously normally, I should say, in the topic area of art, because that's where we started the first time that we did our podcast. But before that, we actually met in Leipzig, and we were in a workshop where we were discussing feminism. And on this occasion, therefore, we want to bring in your reflections on the topic of feminism. And we wanted to start in the area of art. Do you want to tell us a bit about how you see that in general?
Well, my first kind of impression of women in art and culture in general was while I was still in high school, and I was studying in the class philology. So we had a very intense course in literature, and we were talking about all these writers, Russian famous writers that we know, and kind of when we spoke about women, it would be like 20th century poetry or the wives of the writers. So it kind of got me confused, and we then discussed it with our amazing teacher, and she was the first one who kind of introduced me to the issue of women not being acknowledged for their work. And it's a huge problem in literature, because we know all these amazing men writers, but also there have been so many women who wrote and who created art in all kind of directions, and they had to kind of use a male nickname to be taken seriously in the press, or their husbands would steal their works without giving them credit. That's also an issue. I cannot give any specific examples because I'm really bad with names, just remembering them from what I read or heard. So yeah, we discussed that. And also, I think, for example, there's a movie, I think it's called Big Eyes or something like that, about a woman who was painting these people with really big eyes. And I think it's based on the real story and on the real artist. And her husband was also taking credit for her work for years. And it's it's a recent story. It's not that like far away from the modern days, I would say. So it was happening, and it's still happening. And also, I think the other issue is that sometimes people, if they hear that the artist is a woman or the writer is a woman, they think that it's not as serious and as profound and significant as a man's art. They're emotional, or it's not for women. Like I think I don't want to make any mistakes, and I'll be happy if anyone corrects me here. But I think in Italy, during Renaissance, for example, there were a lot of female artists, and they were not taking, again, as seriously, and it was more of like, and later on, like just some skill that they kind of should have. It's like a sign of being well brought up, being in a good family, to know all these things and to be able to write poems and paint and play instruments and stuff like that. But there were really talented female artists throughout the history, and it's really sad that they were taken in such way, and that we still have to kind of dive into the archives and rewrite history to actually know them. I also want to say that I'm really grateful for the people who do that, for the historians and for the enthusiasts who look for that information, dive into the literature, because it's not so easy to like just Google it and find the facts, because it's so unrecognized. And that they bring this knowledge to the wider audience and try to make it a common knowledge. It's really nice. And another thing about, for example, emotional things, like during high school, we also discussed, as I said, women in poetry in 20th century in Russia. And our teacher also told us that, for example, Anna Akhmatova, she was portrayed as a very almost crazy, emotional woman, very depressive. Of course, she was going through a lot of things because of the politics, and she was affected in a lot of ways. And I think she might have even had severe depression, from what we know from the facts. I'm not here to diagnose or anything, but it's just sad that so many people just see her, this sad woman writing poetry. Yeah, and I don't know, for example, a thing about Tolstoy's wife, who was very disrespected by him, but she actually was the one who wrote down his novels, because he was kind of orally producing them, making notes, and then she's the one who made it all in a way that we now perceive. And I think we should give credit, of course, to these women, and know them and talk about them, so the young girls now know that they can go and be writers, they can go and be artists, and they will be given credit and they will be recognized for their work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in many ways, all of the points that you make, and a few thoughts come to mind as well. So I remember reading about a few male poets from the past who had encountered difficult times around the time of the First World War and in the 1920s, and when they had succumbed to their depression or their burnout, it was told that this was because of their deep art, their talent, their ability to understand and empathize with the moment. So in the men, it was kind of considered the purity of their art, which allowed them to feel these things. And yet with the women, it was considered almost like a weakness, as it were. And this lack of objective equality in analyzing these kinds of people is something which hindered in many ways the development of women's literature throughout the decades of the 20th century, I think.
I think we just need to kind of get rid of the gender when we talk about artists and see them, first of all, as artists without any, I don't know, personal qualities like gender, upbringing, anything. We kind of should, I don't know, isolate them personally from what they do in their work, because it makes sense in a lot of ways. I don't like a lot of people's personalities from what I read in the history books, but then their work is very significant and we cannot just erase it. It's like, it reminds me of this issue, for example, in States where there's still a lot of racism in everyday life, and that they don't put pictures on their CVs. So if you're not white, people would still hire you without. So it's a big issue. So I think with the men and women and other genders, and when it comes to their work, we should kind of isolate anything we feel personally about them and only recognize their work at first. And then if we read about them as a person and their personal history and we like it, that as well, why not become a fan of that also, or judge, anything. But yeah, I think women should be just recognized for their work first, and then.
Yeah, at first I thought about what you were saying, and I thought to myself, okay, but then we can't separate the politics of the individual from the art that they produce. But then what you're saying is that's not what you're suggesting. What you're suggesting first is that people should appreciate the art for what it is as art, and thereafter, when they have felt a connection with that art, to go in and try to understand the inspiration behind the art, the creator, and then see where other connections may lie in their appreciation, and whether or not they agree with the principles of the individual, which I think is a good approach as well.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue anyway. There is no simple solutions here, because there are also things, and we talked about it, you cannot understand some things if you don't know the context of it. You cannot understand certain art if you don't know the history behind it. So to just absolutely separately take, I don't know, a painting or a sculpture and try to judge it without any background, of course, it's doesn't really make sense. But then there are things that played the role in the art piece, and there are things that didn't. So I think we should just separate all the things that didn't really play the role. And also it's about our perception, because we can look at something and we can say like, oh, it makes sense for this artist because she's a woman, and it also works. But there should be I think an intention, because when women in art, and I see it very often, they create something that comes from the womanhood and their experience as women, they state it, and you will see it, you will read about it, so it will make sense all at once. But if you, for example, read a book and or you want to buy a book and you see a woman's name and you're like, it's probably some stupid romance once again, that's when you kind of put your personal views and your personal opinion of women first before their work. For example, Emily Bronte, in her time, she was not respected as a writer, and she was advised by men to write about something like Jane Austen and be more like Jane Austen. But if you read her famous, and I think the only novel, you see that she has a very different view on life, and there is so much depth and so many issues that she brings up in her work. And if she read in that novel and I'm not sure if she printed it at first with her real name. I don't really remember because I read about it years ago. But I think if we knew that it was written for a man, for example, it would be like, oh, that's such a serious and profound work, at that time. And it is serious and profound. And I'm actually really happy that at least now she's taking seriously the literature and professionally. But yeah, it's a very complicated and controversial issue, and I can say things, but then there's also things that you can say like, oh, it doesn't work like that. It's not that simple. And it's mostly about how we perceive things, and I think we just should be open-minded and kind of understand that our personal limits and boundaries in our head and our own judgments might not be right. So we should be always open to the thing that can be different. Just try it. Try to think differently, try to put yourself in different shoes, in different position. Maybe you will see that it's not that one-sided.
Yeah, and while you were talking, you kind of led my mind along a certain path, which you also addressed there in your final sentences. When we talk about feminism, it's not the same feminism which different people may feel, believe in, or have experienced. There's more than one kind of feminism. When we talk about women or men or other genders, we cannot simply say, okay, that's how men think, that's how women think, and that's how other people think. There is no single rule to refer to any individual group of people. When you were talking there, I kind of remembered, I think it was a poem by Hannah More I did, and she was talking about slavery, and she was talking, and this was in the 19th century, I believe. She was talking about how the slave trade was abhorrent. Of course, she was right in that, and that the good society or a civilized society would never engage in slavery and the slave trade. But on the other hand, she said that women had no right to get involved in politics. So you had, on the one hand, somebody who had this very progressive opinion with regards to equality from a sense of racial and political equality. But then on the other hand, she was still a part of the patriarchal sort of blindness, which set limits on what a woman should do and what she should not do. And that's kind of what you alluded to there when you were talking about within our mind, we need to be more open. We need to see beyond the limits that we set ourselves. And that also, really cool that you do this. You must have been reading my notes. So you've also led us into the other main topic area, which we wanted to discuss, which doesn't only refer to women who are writers or poets or artists, but in general, every kind of woman who undertakes any kind of normal activity. And it's the psychological element of how they consider themselves within a certain scenario, which can introduce some kind of limits, which you were referring to. Do you want to talk about how, or maybe you've got your own way of introducing it and I've just gone completely around the houses. But when we were kind of discussing what aspects of feminism we wanted to talk about, you mentioned some, and yeah, maybe that would be better if you introduce your own topic.
Okay, so I also see this issue of people seeing a problem in one aspect of life and then completely be blindsided to other issues. The thing is that feminism is a very complicated word even right now, because some people are feminists, but then they're afraid to acknowledge that they're feminists because they don't want to be perceived as this like radical and aggressive kind of people, especially in Russia, for example. I had this experience of people portraying feminist girl as this like depressed, blue-haired girl who was assaulted or even been raped in the past. So she's like angry with all men. And it's so messed up because when I first found out about feminism, I think it was in 2014 or 2015, somewhere around that time. And I found out about it because of Emma Watson's ambassador work with UN. And in her speech, one of the first speeches, she talked that feminism is a movement for both men and women and any gender, basically, just for people. It's not man hating movement. It's a movement towards equality with people, no matter what kind of genitals they were birthed with, and it's really there's a lot of sides to it because men also suffer from sexism a lot. And I think one of the problems is that because they're brought up, all of us kind of sometimes brought up in the households where they tell you these certain things like be a man, be strong, like don't be emotional. And then if you're a girl, you kind of have to be this modest, weak, and very fragile creature. And then you grow up and you're confused in a lot of ways, and it's really hard to change your perspective and to change your views when you're already brought up in that way. So I understand where it comes from, but once again, we should be open-minded, and also it's just not kind, to these cases, and we should understand that it doesn't come from kindness. It doesn't come from consideration and empathy. That's very simple, and we just feel that we hurt people when we approach them in a certain way, when we perceive them and talk to them differently just because they're a different gender. So feminism, it's the best thing is actually to educate people and to kind of spread the knowledge that it's for everyone. And mainly, of course, it discusses women's issue because there are a lot of issues that much more serious concerning women, that they're not receiving education, that they're being trafficking and sold and left without the simple basic human rights, and that those are very huge problems. And it was even brought up in the discussion in Leipzig where we met, that we should first address these issues of trafficking and women being treated in a very wild, ways. And it's very, very serious, and we should address that. But it also comes from the little things, and what we wanted to discuss more here, because I don't have really any experience working with women's right in the bigger picture, and I'm not really that involved in the politics. But I do support all the organizations and people who do that. I respect them extremely for doing that. But it also comes from these little things of not respecting people just because they're a certain gender, and thinking that they're not even human beings, so you can treat them like objects. And once again, it comes from the mentality and from the way we're being brought up. And also, one of the issues that really concerns me is that there are so many women who kind of just agree with what they're told, and I don't know, they kind of give up. I had so many friends who just said, "Oh, I'm just a floor, and people walk all over me, but like I'm a woman, whatever." I'm like, what? No, why? And they kind of put themselves in the victim position, and they get stuck. And it's really bad, and it's bad for everyone, for them and for their safety and well-being, first of all. And then it's really bad for the people that surround them, because they're victims, men in their life, they're put in a position of these controlling freaks. And so it's also a very complicated problem. And then when you respect them and kind of treat them equally, they get also confused and don't really understand it. They don't appreciate it very often. So first of all, we should take care of these like basics. And it's really good that in a lot of countries now, for example, kids are getting educated about this issue from the very beginning in school, because not every household will take care of that. And it's good that government understands it and that they give other opinions, more kind and tolerant opinions to these kids, that people should be treated with kindness and respect and be seen as human beings, no matter how they look, what gender they are, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean, you make a lot of points which I'm going to try to reflect upon as well. So, I mean, gender roles was one of the issues that you talked about, and the psychology of men. You also mentioned that men do also suffer from sexism. This is, in some ways, kind of imposed upon people by the society in which we live, because we still live. Yeah, I have to say this, even though intellectually and with regards to our intelligence as a species, we have improved quite a bit over the last 10,000 years. We still kind of apply the laws of the jungle, as in we still have a very brutal way of life. There are wars being fought around the world which could have been solved using intelligence, could have been solved using the pen or discussion, but instead we continue to push the agenda of weapons. Normally, and I know this is not always the case, but still normally, the people who are sent out to fight those wars are men. When I read about attacks on women, the brutality involved is shocking, and it comes from that same place. It seems as though men, when they want to assert their equality, they do so by physically abusing and harming women, because they feel that's the only way that they can be either heard or respected. And there's absolutely no justification whatsoever for that kind of action. I find it horrifying that we continue to live in that kind of a society. And it made me think, from what you were saying as well, about how we teach kids these sorts of things, which also connects with what we were talking about earlier. I grew up with women authors. I grew up with Agatha Christie. I grew up with Caroline Keene. I grew up with this idea in my mind already there that women were intelligent, that women could solve problems, that women could provide solutions that others could not, that women were, on the one hand, understanding, on the other hand, analytical, that they were leaders, that they were inspirational, that they were strong, that they were able to keep going. They had mental and physical endurance. It was just natural to develop within me because I read women authors, because my mum loved Agatha Christie, because my auntie loved Caroline Keene, and I stole all of her books. Yeah. So because of that, I had that. So if kids have women's books lying around, which can teach them, actually, do you know what? This is what you should expect of women. That makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I've seen that there are a lot of men, for example, who were brought up by women, unfortunately, because their fathers left. But because they've seen how strong women can be and that they can manage bringing up kids and getting, a job and providing for the family themselves, and they see how much they can actually do. And also always be there, for their kids. They have this major respect for women in general. And it's sad that sometimes people have to have these consequences, for example, to understand that. And the thing with women authors and the books, I absolutely agree that kids are they're like sponges, and anything you give to them, they will use it to build a foundation of themselves. So it's really, really important to give them the right books and to give them a bigger picture, and so that see that there is more to this world, and there's a lot of things, and to not just be one-sided, opinionated in a certain way person. It's a very good thing. And with, for example, men also being treated in their psychology and because of sexism, I think what also scares and kind of makes people not like feminism, and men especially, is that they think it's about being the same, and that women want to be treated the same as men. But it's not completely true, because we are not the same. And feminists understand that. Feminists know that, and women have knowledge of that we're different, and we have a different physiology. And it's really wild that only recently they've been actually testing medications, and like women's body is not studied as thoroughly as men's, for example. But the thing is that, of course, we have different psychology, of course we have different strengths, and as you said, with men it always comes to physical solutions, where I think women are mostly known for their use of talk and intelligence to solve the issue, not because they can't fight. If they want, they can. It's not that hard, to go to the gym, build up muscles, and fight people all around the world. Women can do that simply. It's just they choose not to, because it doesn't make sense, and they know that they can talk out anything, and anything can be discussed. And even if you don't share the same opinion with people, which happens very often, you always can come to a compromise, or just choose to respect and agree to disagree, So that's what most women choose. And I think it's what we can all learn from feminine side of the human being. And I really like this also approach that a lot of people have, that we all have a feminine and kind of masculine side, and you just kind of go with your life, and acknowledge what comes first and what's more significant in you, because there are men who feel more feminine, and there are women who feel more masculine, and it also makes sense. Like, it was always like that. For example, I recently watched a video about Sparta, and that their army was proudly bisexual, and men lived with men and women lived separately until men were like 30 years old. So does it make them weak or girly because they were more open-minded? No, they were very physical. Yeah, we all know that, and they were a very strong and strict army, but still they didn't have these limits of being with a man, for example. So they were open to that side of themselves, and that, I think, that makes you stronger if you acknowledge that you can be emotional, you can be more empathetic, you can talk the issue I was having, for example, with men in my life, that they're never open to talk.
Mm.
And like, oh, just a girly girl always just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I like to keep everything to myself, and I will solve all the issues myself, and blah, blah, blah. And then it just kind of, they absorb it, they keep it to themselves, and then they blow up. And you don't understand where it comes from, like all this aggression. And it comes to physical abuse as well with a lot of cases. So there are so many strengths in being women, and there are so many strengths in being a man, and we just should kind of use it all to our advantage. As a person, you, in a lot of ways, you want to kind of develop and grow. So exploring those sides of yourself is very important. And then when you are feeling confident and okay with being partially feminine as a man, and understanding that, oh yeah, I can be emotional and I can cry whenever I want to, and I can share my feelings, and it doesn't make me weak or doesn't make me less of a man, then you treat other people with the same type of respect, and you don't judge women as aggressively as you would, for example, without feeling confident yourself. Because I think a lot of aggression towards women, and a lot of kind of this aggression towards feminism in general, comes from their own fears, and of course limits in their mind, but also like the things that they are unsure about themselves.
Insecurities.
Yeah, insecurities. I think a lot of sexism comes from insecurities. You kind of mirror your problems,
and project them
yeah,
as well. Yeah, I mean, a few of your points as well. Again, you kind of inspire certain recollections and memories. There is such a close connection between sexism and racism. And one of them that you mentioned is men behave in a certain way towards women because they believe they are superior to women. They believe they are stronger. They believe that their opinions are more important. As you were mentioning before with regards to artists, when a man writes something, it has more intelligence and depth behind it. When a woman writes it, no, that can't be the case. It should only be of a romantic nature, perhaps. And the same text would perhaps be judged in a completely different way. Why is it that society makes people feel they have to be superior in some way to some other being? I don't understand that. Why is it we feel we have to control something for us to have a certain place within a community or a society? Again, it doesn't make any sense. There's no need for that to be the case. You also mentioned communication. I mean, I don't know any of the men in your life, but when we talk about problems at work, or in general problems about relationships, it always comes down, I say always, usually it comes down to communication. So again, that doesn't necessarily require everybody to admit their innermost sensitivities, but communicating a perspective, at least opening the way for a conversation to happen where somebody can feel comfortable to express themselves. These are the kinds of things that are lacking. And I mean, we also wanted to talk a bit about everyday activities and roles and responsibilities. And these are the kinds of things which really fit into that. How you conduct yourself in a meeting. Why is it that still to this day, female colleagues, they are interrupted so regularly? People say that they talk too much, or they talk too long, or they think about things too much, or they should ignore this kind of thing because it doesn't matter. Why is it that these kinds of limitations and burdens are placed on women more often than on men?
I absolutely agree with what you said, and the questions you ask, I'm also asking them myself, because I think if you feel any kind of superior to another human being or another being, living being on this planet, there is already something wrong in your mind. Like racism and sexism, yeah, they come from the same root. And any problem with equality, it's all very connected, and it should be taken care of all together. When we talk about sexism and inequality of genders, we should also remember and be aware of other inequalities that happen in our society and that really harm other people in a lot of ways. And also, for example, with communication, when you were talking, I remembered this thing that really says a lot. You know, in movies and in real life, I heard this phrase so often, like when your friends ask, like, what do you like about this guy, and like, why you think this guy is good, and a woman said, like, he listens. And it's just so weird that we see it as not a normal basic thing. It's not a something that every person should do, you know, listen to others. We see it as this thing that defines and differs, you know, a certain man from others, and you're like, oh, I can try to build a relationship or try to communicate with this man because he listens. But every man should listen, because when you want to communicate something, it should be respected. And also, for example, with the intelligence and like having many thoughts, and that women are being interrupted and men think that they think too much. I recently saw that there was a study that scientists say that women use their brain throughout the day with more capacity, and they use it kind of more, and they do think more. And it's just how it happens, you know, with our physiology and how we're kind of built. And that's why they also require a little bit more sleep and stuff like that. But I think it's great. I'm really happy that I think so much, and that I pay attention to the details where, for example, my partner is not, you know, maybe detail oriented, doesn't think about something too much. And I like that about him as well, that it kind of balances out, you know, in the relationship. And I think you don't have to be a woman to think a lot as well. I'm not really into, you know, biology and physiology of our brains, and I know some things, but of course I'm not a scientist. But I think there are no limits to what you want to do and what you want to feel like. And if you're as a man want to be once again more feminine and want to kind of use your brain more often and communicate more and get rid of, you know, this like physical solution towards problems in your life, you can absolutely do that. But the main thing here, and it's very basic, just don't harm other people while you're figuring out what you want to do, or while you already know what you want to do and you're doing it. It's with for example, maybe I needed some coffee today.
Existentialism?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not gonna try to say it again.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the main points in that philosophy is that your freedom as a human ends where the freedom of other person begins. And of course, we can like go into the details, and it becomes the simple basic thing just becomes complicated. But I think it's a nice approach to have in life. If you want to do something and you feel like it might harm other people, or you need anything like that, you should think it over and maybe get a consent from the other person. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that feminism is acknowledging all the differences between genders and all the differences between people. And it's not about, once again, being absolutely the same. It's about being different and still equal. And that's what is really important, and being taken seriously, being taken with respect, and not being interrupted, being listened to. I mean, it's basic human dignity, you know. Be kind, be respectful. But the problem is that, unfortunately, a lot of men just don't see women as other humans, but these kind of like beautiful objects walking around for their own purpose. And it's also what makes it very unsafe to be a woman in nowadays society, because the majority of reels and TikToks, YouTube shorts I've seen about women kind of getting all these kind of things to protect themselves, or stating how they are afraid to walk after work in the evening, not even at night. And women teaching other women to be weird and to pretend like you're some kind of crackhead so people don't come up to you on the street. It's just wild that you have to go to these lengths to just stay alive and well. Yeah, and there are so many little and big problems that come with it. So it can be discussed for hours and days, and actually it should be discussed at all times until we build this equal society. But I don't know when it's gonna happen, but I'm really hopeful.
Yeah, me too. And I'm completely with you, and I do empathize. So many times I've heard students of mine, female students of mine, say that, yeah, I'd never go running at night, even though sometimes that's the only opportunity I get, because I just don't know what might happen. So, I mean, I think any society in which we live, whether we consider our society to be a democracy or not, if people feel that they cannot simply conduct themselves in such a normal manner as to go running at night, because they're afraid of what might happen, then there is something inherently wrong in that society. One last question I wanted to ask you. You always have these fascinating projects that you're working on. Is there anything you've got upcoming that you'd like to tell us about?
At the moment, I'm working on a group project with my partner. Actually, we are thinking of doing stop motion video with collages. So I'm gonna design the collages, and then he's gonna film and edit it. And the thing about this project is that we chose to build it around our perception of Berlin art, and how we see it, and how we kind of feel in it, because it's quite different from what I've experienced in Russia. And the dynamic of it, the rhythm, people, are so many things, and what better way to express your feelings about something than doing an art project. And also, I hope that there's going to be student group exhibition, also curated by me and my friends at the same gallery, Art Bridge in Charlottenburg. We want to collect our works during fall, and then in winter exhibit our most favorite works. And we're still working on the topic, and nothing yet decided with details and how many participants, for example, there will be. But I want it to be something very Berlin-like, very dynamic, very open-minded, very, I don't know, party-like. So we'll see how it goes. But these two, I think, are the main projects that are on my mind right now and that are in progress. And I think they will probably come out somewhere around winter.
Okay. Cool. All right, then I look forward to having links and so on, or any kind of material that you've got that we could put up in the podcast notes that I can share with people so that they can have a look at what kind of things to expect.
Yeah. I can't wait to talk to you about art as well. And I think with doing this project, it will make absolute sense to then discuss it when there's more progress and more experience with it. So that I will have more things to share.
Yeah, wonderful, and always look forward to it. And feel free to invite your partner or your friends, your co-conspirators as well. Then we can have a chat all together, and we can get some different perspectives on that too. Lulu, thank you so much for your insight and for your time. And I wish you all the best with your project.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about it. I hope I wasn't too chaotic with my thoughts, because it happens, and that there's something that people can take from my words. Yeah, I'm very happy that I had this opportunity to discuss it with you.
Two and a mic.